Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
From a student standpoint, you start to hit on it a little bit. So if you go back to, say, the early days of NYU, so let's say that's 15 years ago, and you had that student coming in, and you're creating the culture within your classroom. Here's the expectation. Here's what we're going to do, and in many respects, you're the boss, but trying to be a collaborative teammate with your students. Versus now, 2024 going on 2025. What are the differences, or without leading the witness, are those principle of words basically the same ones, just have to be instilled in a different language or way or what have you?
Well, the one thing that I will say first and foremost is, it's an old Yogi Berra, you learn through experience. And I learned so many valuable lessons at NYU that I've carried with me to Chapel Hill, but I'm an entirely different person. And I know you've had Sierra Rojas on as a guest, and she's a superstar on so many different levels. And I joked with her once, a number of years ago, once I got to Chapel Hill, I said, if you were to sit in my classroom after being a student of mine at NYU, you would have thought I had a lobotomy, because I have undergone a significant change, because the things I was able to do 2003 to 2010 in the classroom, I don't do anymore. I think the big thing that I have really focused on, social and emotional competencies, mental health, leading with compassion. I would say, during my NYU days, I probably was more like, why aren't you doing this? You should be doing this, rather than taking a step back and saying, okay, this situation was presented to me. How should I handle it without my initial response being like anger or frustration? And then you put yourself in the student's shoes. And I tell the students all the time, I'm learning far more from you than you are from me. And we had this conversation the other day in my introduction to sport administration course. I said, who has the power in the room here? And I says, it's not me, it's you. But we need to learn how to harness that, and we need to develop into it. And I think what I've seen is a change in myself, where it's not as much disciplinarian anymore, as much as motivator, in the way of being a source of comfort and understanding accessibility. I work with an extraordinary amount of student athletes, and I love it every day. But their schedules are crazy. So I'm usually in the office by 5 o'clock in the morning, because I'm trying to work around their practice schedules or their travel schedules. And now ACC is a little all over the place. So with that dynamic, and my big thing is you have to adapt. And when you adapt, what you got to do it with kindness. And that's what I try to do. So I would say I am entirely different. And it's not really the students, because I think they're all smart, but I think it's the way you deliver the messaging, being accessible. And it kind of goes back to what both of you were talking about, is, the whole thing of authenticity, comfort, and trust. I think a lot of these students right now, they are so fascinating to me, because they're dealing with NIL. They're dealing with the pressures of what's going to happen in college athletics over the next year. They're dealing with the pressures of winning. And particularly at a place like North Carolina, the acronym is University of National Championships. And it is that way for a reason. And I try to sympathize with the students, saying, okay, we have our field hockey team is playing in the NCAA's number 1 seed today. What's that pressure going to look like over the next 2 weeks for them in the tournament, and how does that affect their academic performance? So for me, it's a far more multifaceted approach than it probably was at NYU. And that's because of experience. That's because of maturity. That's a byproduct of falling on my face a few times and realizing it wasn't working, and your ways are archaic. You need to adapt, but you have to adapt with kindness.
That's great.
So, the question I have that, I think Tony, you and I probably talked about this over dinner at some point or another. There was a point where there was no such thing as a sports management degree. Like you were in communications or you were in journalism or you were in, and, tell me about a little bit about that. I guess you can go all the way back to NYU and how it, and what's going on at UNC now, because I mean, I kind of feel like Tony and I, the C plus students, we did pretty well by not having sports schools, right? Because it was really like those of us who gravitated, we've kind of found this alley that we went down and we came out and it was like Oz. It was like, oh my God, buying time for, BBDO or selling from ABC. But now, like, wow, it's been uncovered and discovered. And now there's like lines out the door of people trying to get into it. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how that affects students and their journey.
Well, when I got to NYU, I was an adjunct. I was still working at Madison Square Garden at night, trying to figure out how do I blend my two passions, the sports industry and being a teacher, because I love coaching. And, I coached for high school baseball for 10 years, loved that. But what I've seen when I got to NYU, it was only a handful of us. It was very, very small, maybe 5 or 6 of us. And I always felt as if we were like the land of misfit toys. And we always felt that way, but we believed in each other and we believed in the spirit of building. And that's what really inspired me, was working with high quality people who believed in the product of being of service to others, being an educator, being a motivator, but it eventually built momentum. But then I think from my perspective is when we finally started to get to a place where we believed we could get to the next level, other people started noticing, and they weren't the right people in terms of leadership to help us get to the next level. And it complicated matters. So when I arrived at UNC, I immediately realized in the sport administration program that I was in a really special place. Everyone was very collegial, supportive, really smart. And I knew, okay, we have the team. Okay, the general manager has assembled the really good team here. And that is very motivating. But I think my frustration with all of it is because our program has grown by leaps and bounds. Our undergraduate program has like 350 students right now.
Wow.
We have the second best graduate program in the world. And, it's a very special place. But I think a byproduct of it, it's the culture, it's the camaraderie of the team. And the one thing I can say with great certainty is that usually my office is the repository for complaints, whether it be playing time, whether it be travel schedule. It's never about faculty because they believe in what we're selling. But I'm also a big believer, and Tony has seen this firsthand with me. You got to blend the academic with the professional. And if you don't do that, you're doing these students a disservice. So you can come out of UNC with a sport administration degree, but if you haven't bought into the entire program, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I see a lot of wonderful sport administration programs out there. There's probably far too many to count. But I've always believed in the concept that the both of you talked about, the authenticity, the personal touch, the industry connections, the mentorship, but also looking beyond the classroom. I'm always telling students, don't worry about the grade. Worry about the experience. Worry about the knowledge you're acquiring. And I said, the grade is going to be the short-term gain for the long-term loss if you're not paying attention beyond. I call it the Chapel Hill bubble. Just because it's a very warm, safe, protective environment. And my goal is just to get them ready for life outside of UNC. So the big difference is, I think in NYU we were building and trying to build, and there's growing pains with that. And when we got it to a certain point, we had some philosophical differences with people.
Yeah.
And when I got to UNC, you had the team in place and they had the track records. And you're always going to have barriers in academia, but I can say with great certainty, I trust all my colleagues. I trust they're doing the best thing for the students, and it's that rising tide raises all ships mentality. So that's what I kind of buy into.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important. And as you said, I think there's 350 different schools with sports management. So the young person needs to, yes, directionally understand sports and the disciplines about that, but understand it is a business. I mean, that's sort of thing I think we all had to learn. It's like, oh, I'm in sports, so I'm going to get to go to all these games and hang out. Yeah, but there's a real business to it. And when I was doing some advising at Columbia, my whole role was to say, okay, now you all have these great degrees. Now you're going into the work environment, you're interviewing. What's going to be the difference? What's going to be the tiebreaker to hire Ray versus Wayne versus Tony? And so that people skill and that hard work. I mean, I hope particularly our young guests that are listening and watching heard that I get in at 5 a.m. to meet the expectation of the work. Um, and again, it's a little bit of an anecdote, but a guy used to be the number 2 or 3 at Major League Baseball, Tim Brosnan. He would get a call from a parent saying, "Hey, would you talk to my son or daughter?" And he goes, "Fine, but have them call me. I'm not going to do it through you, the parent." And then the son or daughter would call and he said, "Okay, here's the deal. During the workday, I can't really do much because I'm working, but I'll meet you at 6 a.m. at the Starbucks, which is right across the street on Madison Avenue." And he said, more than you would want to recognize would say, "Well, wait a minute, I don't get up at 6 a.m. And that was the signal right away that, okay, you're not really dedicated. You just want to, you think this is going to be a cushy thing, and it really isn't. And I think particularly for those that are now 5 through, say, 7 or 8 years in the business, is you sometimes will hit not a wall, but it's like, okay, what's the next step? Because this keeps evolving. As you just said, you're nowhere near done.
Mm-mm.
And Ray was at 3 or 4 different places. I was at the same place for a long time, but then I sort of reinvented myself after those 26 years at Anheuser-Busch, because you want to keep evolving as a human being, and it's really important. So Ray, but Wayne,
Sure. Go ahead.
either one can answer this question, but no, Wayne.
I'll defer.
So I read a lot of your articles with Forbes and talk about how you inspired by a topic and say, okay, I'm going to write this, because I think pretty much every article you write gets published, but and they're very different. And for those who want to follow, I'm sure you can just Google Wayne and Forbes articles, but give a little background how you do that.
So I'm very old school. What I like is keeping a notebook. I'm one that always keeps a notebook and a pen next to me at all points in time, and I'm always jotting ideas. And we talk about practice what you preach, so I do that with the students, and I always leave it on my desk in my office, and I show them. So for me, it's just I like to take ideas. If it's a word, if it's a phrase, if it's a concept, and I'll just jot away. And then, kind of tied into a perspective of let's be thoughtful about it. Let's be well researched. Let's be articulate and understand if the average person is going to Google my name and it comes up, they might not be the biggest baseball fan, but they can walk away from reading the article with a deeper appreciation and understanding. And not to talk down to anyone, it's more of, okay, keep it a certain tone. I think that's very important. So I know everyone today's on their iPhones and the laptops and the iPads and everything, but I just love the whole concept of keeping a notebook or journal and just writing ideas down. And that could be even if I'm writing a letter of recommendation for someone or working on a project, I like to diagram it out. And that's how it really starts me. So I will not sit in front of a laptop or a computer and write until I have pages upon pages of notes, and then you formulate. And I also tell students, when you work, you got to find the time of the day that inspires you the most. Now, for me, I'm a morning person. So what I do is I'm always in the office at 5 o'clock every morning. And then I'll give you an example. The other, I worked from 5 a.m. to 8 o'clock at night. And someone looked at me and says, "Wow." And I said, "No, that's the job. do your job, and if you're throwing a curveball, you have to adapt and adjust. Now, I wasn't happy with what happened, but you got to do it. So
Right.
I'm always trying to instill that into the students, do your job. So for me, it's practice what I preach. If I'm going to tell you in a classroom, this is how you write a paragraph, this is how you prepare an article, I'm doing the same thing. So it starts with that idea, but then it's let me research it. Let me think about it from a couple of different perspectives. And then also it's about probably editing it about 15 to 20 times.
Right.
So there's a lot that goes into it. I'm probably doing anywhere between 4 to 5 articles a month. So I
Wow.
counted the other day because I had to, and it was over 400 I've written so far.
Wow.
I got a lot of catching up to do. Holy cow. Good thing Christmas time's coming. No, that's great. And I think that you really hit on a lot of aspects there about, like, so 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. And they say, of course, if you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. And I don't know where that, if I asked 100 kids, pick a kid, I don't know if that's 21 to 35, or how many would agree that if you love your work, you won't work a day in your life? Because I think they feel like there's just more of a bifurcation of work and play. But the thing I wanted to mention, because I keep a notebook by my bed too, is the greatest nightstand note ever written was by Brandon Tartikoff, who used to run NBC.
Yep.
Woke up in the middle of the night and he wrote down MTV Cops. And from that came Miami Vice.
There you go.
Which was one of the big hit shows of the 80s and 90s, I guess, introduced the whole genre of music and everything. So the nightstand's a good place. I mean, you probably have one wherever you go. Yep. I don't, because I'm not in as many places with desks as you. But the nightstand notes are really good.
I'm a big believer in it because I'm afraid of forgetting an idea because we're so overstimulated.
Right.
And I take it with me wherever I go, and it could be anything, like I said, a letter, a project that I'm working on, an article, because I feel like I have to flesh everything out. And my mind always goes into when I was at MSG, I love this whole philosophy. Every Monday morning for a half an hour, I sat with the senior director of financial planning and analysis and a couple of other members in our department, and we just strategized. And we talked about what was going to happen and who's going. And I love that. I'm a big believer in working on a team. I just love that energy and that camaraderie and that spirit. And the other thing too, and I tell this to my colleagues at UNC all the time, I don't want to let anyone down. I feel, look, I don't have a PhD. I'm not a traditional academic. I'm a BBA, MBA. I'm business school trained and everything. And it was very daunting for me to go into North Carolina because I go into a department with world-renowned researchers and scholars. And my mindset went to, where can I bring value? Where can I be unique? Where can I be authentic? And I knew right away the vehicles I can use to get there. And so far, so good. And I do encounter that, but like my whole thing is, and Tony and I have had this conversation many times, is I have a different vision of what academia should look like. And I think we need to evolve a little more. I think we have to get more into the critical thinking, the intellectual curiosity, and it's not so dogmatic. It has to be more about pivoting. And I always use, Tony, your example, when you taught leadership for crisis situations, the Gatorade issue,
Right.
and how that you have to pivot. So I've been always preaching the concept, life's going to throw you a curveball. And I would say the past recent years, I've got my fair share of curveballs, but how do you turn and make it? And a good friend of mine said, me arriving at North Carolina, she said, every port in the storm has its purpose. And I know my purpose in North Carolina is to pay it forward, to be a good role model, to be there for the students, and to relate with them in a way of, hey, look, I was an athlete. I lived not the life that you're living because it's unbelievable right now. but I can speak the language. But I also can be a source of comfort. But most importantly, I can help you with critical thinking and navigate the situations rather than being a yes person telling you exactly what you want to hear. I'm going to tell you things you probably don't want to hear, but it's coming from a loving and authentic place rather than a selfish place.
Yeah, and you need a balance. I mean, when I was advising at Columbia, they came out with something that said, if you're going to teach in the classroom, you need to have a PhD. And I kiddingly said, okay, so I've been in the business for 30 years, but I really can't teach because I don't have a PhD, which was totally ludicrous, right? In my opinion. And so you
Mine
need
too.
a balance of people.
Mine too.
You know?
Why not?
What?
Oh, mine too. I said, I'll throw in. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Wayne, we're sort of coming down to the end here, but Ray always asks this question. So I'm sort of stealing his thunder, but you know, you're still evolving, so I think you're probably going to get. But if you could go back to the young Wayne, and other than being Derek Jeter, who is there something you said? You know, if I really could have done that, that really could have been cool. I'm happy with what I'm doing, but you know, that would have been really cool.
Tony, I do that all the time. I mean, that's part of critical thinking and self-reflection. The piece of advice I would give my younger self: have more fun. I took everything very seriously to the point where I put the blinders on, and I was not good when I was younger of paying attention to other things. I was always laser focused, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I think it was to be a little more relaxed, be more receptive to ideas from other people, not to be so intense with everything, but also, try to have a little more levity. And I struggled with that. I still do. But I that's definitely the one thing. It was I put this enormous amount of pressure, and if I didn't be able to get to do this, I would view it as a failure. And I'm going through some interesting things at UNC right now that are very good. And someone will come in and compliment me, but I'll always focus on the negative. Where, okay, how do we get better? One of my esteemed colleagues came in, Professor Barbara Osborne, the other day, and really paid me a wonderful compliment. And the only thing I could focus on was that one thing that I could have done better rather than, and she was basically saying, smell the roses. Okay, stop, focus on it. So that would probably be the piece of advice that I give to my younger self, is like, take a step back, try to enjoy things a little more and have more fun.
Right.
So I know we're just about out of time, but I have to say, I think that's what this current generation is doing right now. I think they are trying to be relaxed. I don't know how it's going to turn out, because I can tell you that having a really sharp blade cuts through a lot of stuff. But I think this current generation is trying to have more fun. They are trying to stay more relaxed. And I don't know if it's better to think that when you're looking back than when you're going forward, because that having more fun and being more relaxed, very interesting, very, very interesting to me, that whole concept of, do you look back and say, I wish I was, or do you do it now and see how things turn out? And that's the $64 million question. Back to you, Tony, to wrap it up, buddy.
Yeah. Well, Wayne, thank you. I knew it'd be great. It was great. Thanks for all your insight. Continue. Good luck. Your students are very lucky. The university is very lucky to have you.
That's for sure.
And till next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Great to see you.